Welcome to the Commerce Tomorrow podcast, your one stop to learn about the technology that's powering the future of commerce. Here are your hosts, Dirk and Kelly.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Commerce Tomorrow podcast. We have been on a very long summer break, but finally we are back. I'm here today, as always, with my co-host, Kelly Götsch. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Dirk.
Good to hear you again. Was a long time. And today our special guest is Jan Hegewald, head of product offer platform from Zalando. Hi, Jan. How are you doing?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. I'm doing fine. So let's see what we can do today.
Awesome. So before we jump into your current role at Zalando, and I know we have a lot of topics that we would like to discuss about that, do you mind giving an introduction about yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure, of course. I'm Jan Hegewald. From my background, I'm a computer scientist. I started my career in the consulting industry, so the first 9 years of my professional life have been in custom software development with Capgemini. From 2002. So I did everything in the software development lifecycle, from requirements analysis, design, writing specifications, implementing, rolling out at the customers, project management, and so on. And after those 9 years, I then switched to another consulting company, a small one, Campana & Schott it is called, and they are specialized in project, program, and portfolio management consulting. I was there at this time responsible the first time for a small team, and we were basically introducing tools and processes around project and program portfolio management. And this time it was the first occasion where I had some touch points with agile methodology, in contrast to what was happening almost everywhere before, like waterfall. And then I switched afterwards to the e-commerce industry. So I joined Idealo in 2013. And my latest position there was head of technology for B2B and business operations. What I did there as well was I helped restructuring the whole product development organization of around 250 people. And then I liked the e-commerce industry quite a lot. And now since 2017, I'm here in Zalando.
Great. Sounds like you have a good background, like you were really built for this, which is great. Maybe before we get into the other questions, could you explain Zalando and just what you do? Because it's not a very well-known brand in the US. And also maybe talk a little bit about how well-known Zalando is from a tech standpoint, because I've been working at Commerce Tools now for over 3 years, and from the moment I arrived in Berlin, everyone here talks Zalando, Zalando, Zalando. I mean, even across Europe, everyone talks about it. So who is Zalando, and why are you guys so famous?
Okay, cool. Happy to do. Zalando actually turned 10 years this year. So sometimes we are considered a startup, but I think we're not really anymore. Especially if you look at the number of our employees, we are around 14,000 people in Europe currently. And what we strive to do and to become is the starting point for fashion. Like if you think about video today, you think about Netflix, and we aim at becoming the same destination for fashion, the starting point for fashion in that sense. So today we already have 28 million customers in 17 markets in Europe. That's why you have not heard about us in the US. We are focusing on Europe. And those 28 million customers approximately visit Zalando around 300 million times per month. Interestingly, more than 80% of them from mobile devices. And in order to become the starting point for fashion, you need to have the fashion, right? So we have 2,000 brands that you can shop for on our platform. We have a curated shopping service that is called Zalon. So if you want to have some advice and some fashion guidance from a professional stylist, they can do that for you. And in general, I think as a company, we focus on 3 pillars, or we are based on 3 pillars. First of all, it's of course fashion. So we have the knowledge in all the categories to provide you with whatever you need for some occasions, which is in trend, and so on and so forth. Then we, of course, a very important part of our business is the logistics part, to provide our customers with a good experience, getting the delivery like next day if you're a Plus customer. And of course, tech plays a very central role. So if we talk about technology, this is basically our means to innovate for customers and for the good of the whole industry. I can give you maybe some examples. One of the most pressing topics in fashion business online is the sizing topic, because you're always not so sure about will this item that I'm looking at fit me if it arrives at my home. And so we're investing quite a lot there in order to reduce returns. We do this by personalized size recommendations. So if you have an account with Zalando, we can recommend you for a lot of items which size to choose. Or even if you don't have that, we give you recommendations like, if you buy something from this brand, it normally is a little bit smaller, so please buy one size larger. And there's a lot that we are looking into in order to improve this further. Another example that is also illustrating how technology makes a really big difference in our industry is, if you think about fashion, you're normally not looking to buy some item, but you want to be dressed for something. So you need an outfit or something, and not just a shirt normally. Maybe you want to go to a wedding or something else. And we have developed, for example, the algorithmic fashion companion. That's a machine learning based algorithm that, based on one item that you're looking at, can recommend you a complete outfit that fits together well, and it can inspire you. So customers seek inspiration, and you can be inspired through seeing whole outfits, because then you can see or can imagine how the whole thing will look, and whether you like it or not. And with the algorithmic fashion companion, we can do such recommendations at scale. Our third topic where also technology plays a really big role is sustainability. Of course, sustainability becomes an even more increasing topic, especially also in the fashion industry. And this starts with transparency for the customers, like how sustainable are the goods that I'm buying. So what we allow you is to filter for sustainable goods if you want to specifically look for them. We're currently making active changes in our packaging to improve the sustainability. For example, beauty products that we also sell, we shipped previously in plastic bags, but we do now ship in paper material. And also we're working on improving sustainability in the supply chain. And all these examples can only be achieved or can be worked on through technology. So that's really the core of what we are doing. And which I think is a very unique approach, especially in the transformation of the fashion industry from an offline to an online business. When I think about what I specifically do, you asked that as well, right? I'm responsible for the product offer platform within Zalando. That's a rather technical platform. What we do is we get information about products, so like the images and the materials the goods are composed of, descriptions, names, and so on. And we combine this information with stock levels that we get from our warehouse systems and from our partners, and with the prices also from our systems and from partner systems. And we combine those three information into a product offer, and then we distribute them towards what we call sales channels. So we decide whether it will be sold on Zalando.de or on Zalando Lounge Spain or something. We're talking here about around about 400,000 products. And we also do a quality assurance, like making sure that every good that is processed has an image at least, or that there is a price and so on. And we also do a business steering, like some parts should not be offered in some markets, and this is also what we do. And we do the merchant selection. So if there are multiple offers for the same good, we decide which merchant wins in there. So if you summarize it, it's a lot of data processing. We produce around 40,000 or up to 40,000 product offer updates per second. And this is all done by a department of around 20 people. and my role here is the one of a dedicated owner. This is a position we call like this. I'm responsible for the engineering as well as the product management as well as the business aspects. So holistically responsible for the product of our platform.
Sounds awesome. And yeah, well, we already spoke about that a couple of times. I think the first time, Jan, was, I think it was 2018 at the K5 conference when we had both been on the panel together. Well, Zalando definitely is a tech company that does retail and not a retail company that has to do some tech aside. Let's talk a little bit about the technology organization itself. How does it look like? I know it's always impressive numbers and everybody wants to hear it and it's constantly growing. So about how many developers are we talking? Where are they all located? How's the tech organization structured and so on? Give us a little bit on insights about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. First of all, to start, what we have learned in the past that this traditional model of having a tech organization like an IT department where the business departments hand over the requirements and then wait until they are given back in the form of working tech solutions does hardly work or not work as well as we would like it to work. So what we have is no dedicated tech organization, but we say we have something like tech everywhere. So every department who needs to implement some IT solutions and then have to have their own tech resources, because otherwise you always have these prioritization problems and you work against each other because business complains that IT is too slow in delivering and IT complains that business does not know what they want. And so we have tried to merge this as much as we can. So, but nevertheless, if we look at what I would like to call now kind of delivery teams, we have around 200 of them, which are comprised of 2,000 employees all over. In Germany, we are present at 3 sites with tech specifically. This is Berlin, of course, then Dortmund and Hamburg. And we have 2 development hubs in Dublin and Helsinki, because there's a lot of talent out there who can help us quite a lot. And as you know, the market for software engineers is always a tough one. We work in cross-functional agile teams. We are employees from more than 100 different nations. If I look at, for example, also my org that I'm part of, this is distributed also between Berlin and Dublin. So parts of my colleagues are in Dublin and we work closely together with them as well. And if we look at how the software is built and operated, so this is what the teams do themselves. So the teams build the software, the teams operate the software themselves. So there's the holistic responsibility for what they do.
That's very exciting. It's a huge organization. I didn't realize that you had 200 separate teams, 2,000 employees. That's pretty impressive. And we'll get back to the microservice part of this. Mm-hmm. And I know that microservice teams a lot of times have autonomy to pick their own tech stack. But if you were to generalize, what does your tech stack look like today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, there is a diverse tech stack here in Zalando. We recently did a calculation of how many programming languages are in use, and we came out with a result of 42. But there's nevertheless a kind of majorly used stack. So what we do, especially in the product offer platform, is my teams mainly use Scala and Java. For front-end components, we use JS frameworks like React. If you look at data engineers here in Zalando, they of course prefer Python. If you look at storage technologies, there's a lot of things that we do in Postgres, SQL. We have a lot of messaging systems. So they are mainly based on Kafka queues, but we have an own product, which is open source, by the way. On top of that, Nakari, which simplifies management of Kafka in large scale environments. And all of that is mainly run in Amazon Cloud. Of course, we have a few legacy components which still are located in data centers, but most of what we do is done on AWS.
Jan, one question here. that I have. We spoke about that also, I don't know, 2 years ago probably. I remember that. At that time, you just had been in the shift of transferring the data engineers, all your machine learning resources from a centralized team that you had, as far as I remember, to all the teams, so that it's not a centralized function, but it's part of the whole organization. And I remember at that time already, it was a very impressive number of people that you had working on those topics. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of that today?
Yeah, basically that's pretty well summarizing it. So we started with this machine learning activities in a centralized way in order to build some first knowledge on how it works and how we could leverage it to, for example, power the use cases, some of which I explained earlier. And in some point in time, you then realize how this central knowledge has been built and people are capable of doing this, but it doesn't really scale if you want to apply it at various stages. For example, there are various things on our platform where we use machine learning. The sizing example is one that I gave. Another one would be if you look at payments for fraud prevention. We also use machine learning, for example. Currently, we are also looking into, in the near future, we will be looking into using machine learning for choosing the right merchant for the customer. And if you want to distribute this and apply this broadly, we also use it for another very important aspect is in product understanding. So if you have a lot of data that comes from the suppliers around products and you have images and so on, you are nevertheless always lacking data. Like you can categorize some items by loose fit or wide fit or appropriate for like a birthday party, or it's the length of the arms of a shirt, for example, and all these things are things that you normally don't get readily usable and standardized, especially if you get the data from different suppliers. And this is also something that we tackle through machine learning, image recognition, text recognition, and so on and so forth. And in order to really apply this at scale, you need to distribute this knowledge. And so this is why we have today people able to work with these machine learning models, setting them up, training them, identifying the right mechanisms, spread across the teams, because we think we need to be able to really apply those technologies across the company. And it's good for a start to do this in a centralized way, but in some point in time you need to scale it across the organization. This is what we do. Nevertheless, we have still something like our research department, who are specifically looking in very top-notch topics and doing some more research-focused work that not necessarily always has to have a very immediate application, although they're also really close to doing something that can be put into production, but they are more free to look into topics that will be relevant at a longer time scale, for example. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Cool.
So a lot of traditional organizations would look at Zalando, right? You have 200 teams. Each team has multiple microservices potentially. You have 42 programming languages. You have multiple eventing technologies. You have multiple locations. And they think, how on earth could that possibly work?
Yeah.
And I mean that in the best possible way. Because traditional IT organizations have one programming language, they have one back-end team, they have one front-end team. So how do you manage that and give each team the autonomy they need, but without creating all that chaos in the middle tier between the different teams? I guess how do you balance this need for centralization and standardization versus giving each team the control they need?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the past, we started an approach that is called radical agility, where we gave the various teams a very high level of autonomy where they could decide which technologies to use, which is one of the reasons why we have so many programming languages in use, for example. And it was really up to them how they implement solutions for the topics that were at hand. today we learned that this was maybe a little bit too far, and we're trying also to reduce the technology stack a little bit to less elements than 42 programming languages. But especially the microservices architecture that you talked about is a key success factor in that to enable this scale that we're talking about. Because if you have those big monoliths that a lot of companies have, you're not able to work on these in parallel with 200 teams. So you need to have this segregation of responsibility. And the best way to do this is, of course, through microservices. So microservices allow teams to work independently, but nevertheless together. The balance that I see that needs to be found is also microservices are very easy to spin up, but it's then a challenge to balance this, what quickly becomes legacy versus those new microservices that you can spin up. I think that's a challenge that's not easy to solve. And also operations and maintenance are, of course, a little bit hard in this environment, which is very diverse. This is why we have also a lot of is maybe too much said, but we have centralized compliance, which is very standardized. For example, when last year the GDPR became relevant, you have to look at nearly every system. And in an organization of our size, it would be even a challenge to identify which systems are there if we had not those centralized compliance mechanisms in place. For example, everything that we have a very standardized deployment environment where it's automatically also tracked. It made sure that in a central tool, we know which team is available for which component, so that you know whom you can approach for some topics. We centrally identify security vulnerabilities, for example, if there are outdated versions of libraries in use, and then can automatically contact the teams to fix them. And so it really needs the balance in order to be able to not only be quick, but also be able to scale and to operate safely. This is something that we invested quite a lot in to enable this. But there's also other challenges. If you think about microservices, for example, there is this architectural principle of shared nothing. So microservices shall be independent from others by definition, which also means they need to be independent in terms of data stored. And so they should hold all their data locally. If I look at my department, when I joined Zalando, it was a little bit smaller than now. And then we got 2 more services in the scope of our responsibility. And of course, they have a kind of, as they are part of the same pipeline, they have the storage for the same data. And so if you look at this today, the same data, and as I said earlier, that's about 400, the data about 400,000 products is stored in multiple ways redundantly. And while this is beautiful from a theoretical architectural point of view, if you are doing this cloud-based environment, this also implies a lot of costs. So what we do currently is to try to unify those data storages, also to centralize a little bit the very much spread business logic. And these are some downsides of microservices that you need to be aware of and actively manage. Otherwise, you will also be in some trouble. But in general, the benefits are quite clear. Like our teams can totally independently deploy from each other anytime they want. Of course, there need to be some synchronization points if you break some APIs or something, but this doesn't happen too frequently. So this in general works quite well. And this is mainly due to this microservice architecture, which allows this autonomy of the teams.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. The advantages, especially for your case on microservices, overcome the disadvantages on data redundancy and so on. And there's always, I think everybody needs to find their own way, how also religious you are about some of these rules.
Yes.
If you really say that you need for each service a single data storage, and then how many times do you duplicate data and how do you synchronize it and so on. So there's, definitely a lot of things that everybody needs to figure out what's best for themselves. Architecture. I got one question that's a little bit related to your microservice architecture, because I assume it came up with the, I would say, move and iteration that Zalando tech stack went through in the last couple of years. you implemented in the last years an API first culture, so architecture and culture, the APIs of Zalando are core part of your product. There's a lot of stuff written on your tech blogs. How did you adopt that, or what was the way that from the architecture design that you had been on before, when you moved to an API first architecture? What had been the dependencies? How have you done it? I think this is something that many large retailers currently are thinking about. How can we get off from the one way from our monolithic stack to a more microservice-like architecture, and how can we open up and have the core as our platform as APIs and the user interfaces as individual applications on top of that? How did you master that challenge?
Yeah, for us, this was basically kind of a prerequisite. Otherwise, also this microservice approach with the distributed teams would not have worked. And I would even go beyond. It's not only that we have this between backend and frontend. We have this kind of everywhere. Because, for example, if even my team of the around 20 people with the central product of our platform, they have upstream dependencies like the pricing system, the content management system for products and stock systems, as I said earlier. But we also have downstream systems that do some, for example, search uses the data to index it and so on. So we have this topic everywhere because each of those upstream or downstream teams could also potentially use a completely different tech stack. And so we also need to have an API. It's not, I mean, in this specific case, it's not always the case because it's stream-based and it's not really an API. But for example, for serving the data of the product offers on request, we have an API. So there's always this coupling between the teams, which is very loose. And when teams are independent and, for example, also remote with Dublin and Berlin, and you need to move quickly, this kind of enforces API first or maybe agreeing on a schema for streams. One example that we also recently have is that there is a request to implement something for our loyalty program. There's Zalando Plus, where for 15 euros a year you get faster delivery and you get some fashion advice personally for you and so on. And there's a request to implement a feature, and this shall be implemented before this week's Cyber Week or Black Friday, which is the end of November. And so the timeline is pretty tight, and it depends on a lot of teams. And we, for example, need to have a service which gives us the status of a customer, whether a customer is a Plus customer or not. And if you need to move quickly in here, you cannot simply wait until something is developed and then you can integrate with that, but you have to move in parallel. And so what we did here is that the API was agreed on first, and now there is a kind of skeleton API in use, but the implementation is not there. But we are now able to develop our parts against this API, which allows us to move fast and to deliver this way before Cyber Week and have it ready by then. So this is really kind of prerequisite to make this work. And if you look at this, what you mentioned, Dirk, the separation between the presentation layer and the backend services layer. For example, today we still have partly web and apps teams separate. And there are tons of backend services. For example, we have services that create outfits. We have services that create recommendations for you. We have the normal data providers for product offers like the product offer platform, and they all need to come together and be displayed at various parts of the front-end experience. And also this is only possible through a clear separation between front-ends and back-ends, and a clear source of truth. If you are a front-end and you need some data from the back-end, that you go to one service who gives that readily available to you, because we didn't have that clear separation in the past, which also led to that some data that was displayed somewhere on the page was displayed somewhere else, slightly different, and I mean content-wise, not from the presentation. And this, of course, is not a good user journey if you get kind of slightly contradicting information. And that's also why it's so important to have this clear API where if you are a front-end premise, you can simply say, give me that all the data that I need to display, for example, this product, and then you get it. And if it's used somewhere else, it's the same data. And so the customer will also experience the same experience everywhere they come across that product, for example.
So I have a related question. So you have hundreds of microservices. How many do you think you have? If you have 200 teams, how many?
I don't know. We had done an analysis of that, but I don't remember the number, the exact one. But it's definitely more than a 4-digit number.
See, by the way, you not knowing how many microservices is a really good thing, and I actually wrote about that because if you knew an exact number, that would probably mean that it's too centrally managed.
Yeah, actually, we do know the central number. I don't edit the complete number. I don't know by heart. Because of this, what I mentioned earlier, this governance mechanisms that we have in place and that we need, for example, to be sure that we are compliant and stuff. So there are central mechanisms to check them, and we have the numbers. I just don't have it from the top of my head.
Yeah, no, I understand. So how do you keep each one of those, if you have more than 1,000 microservices, how do you keep each one of them up and running in production? So do you have ops on call from each team? Do you have developer on call from each team? How do you do that?
Yeah, actually we do real DevOps. So sometimes there are companies who say that they do DevOps because they have a DevOps department. And I think then it's not DevOps, but then it's pure ops, right? So we do DevOps. So as I said earlier, our teams build the software and they run it. So for example, in my department, we have a 24/7 call on duty for which you can join as a developer. And then you are responsible for 1 week. This rotates. Typically for what's going on. So the developers also build like the monitoring, alerting, and if something goes wrong, some thresholds are exceeded, then they get called on their phone, also possibly in the night, and immediately can act to fix the issues potentially. Good thing is that if you have it in this way, the developers immediately feel the pain. And so there is a very strong desire to preventing such situations in the future, which really leads to the developers reaching a level of operational excellence that's really good, and that's required because everything that we run is kind of mission critical. If our platform was down, we would quickly sell stuff on our front-end premises that is no longer available, but we have not been able to tell the front-ends because the stock level updates have not been processed and so on. So it is really crucial that everything is up and running. And the teams do it themselves. Nevertheless, this is not done for everything. So we, of course, classify the criticality of our services. So there are tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 services, and depending on the criticality. And there are, of course, also some services for which there is no on-call duty, because if they are down in the night, that's not so problematic. But others are, of course.
Got it. Final question from me, and then I'll turn it over to Dirk. But you're very famous across Europe for your public thought leadership. And I've been working for Commerce Tools now and coming to Europe for more than 3 years. And all I hear is Zalando, Zalando, Zalando everywhere. And you have a very well-read tech blog. You speak at conferences. That evangelism, that public thought leadership really seems to be part of your company's DNA. Mm-hmm. Besides being excited about cool technology, why do you do it, and how have you enforced that as a cultural norm within the organization? Because it's very rare to see that out there. And I love it, by the way.
Well, yeah, that's a very multifaceted question, right? So maybe let me say, one thing is we're also very active in the open source community, right? So we provide a lot of our products that we developed internally to the public. Why do we do this? Because, of course, we want to give back. A lot of our stack is based on open source software that we benefit from, and so we want to give back in a way the cool stuff that we develop with the 2,000 people, right? They create a lot of value, and it can be beneficial for others as well. On the other hand, of course, we also benefit from that because others can contribute to that enriched functionality of the products that we develop as open source. And this is also kind of already as in our DNA. being there out in the public, also representing Zalando, we had this in our performance management system in the past, even for software engineers, to encourage them to do so. I think because it's really important I think, for example, the job market is a challenging one, as I said earlier, and we do a lot of very cool stuff, and we really use a lot of latest technologies, which especially engineers are normally really keen on working with. So why not tell this and make it known? On the other hand, I think people are motivated quite a lot by themselves to do this because they earn the reputation also outside. And I mean, we don't have this anymore in our performance management system that we so at performance management about giving feedback to individual colleagues of how they are performing, how they can grow, and so on. We don't have this formally written down there anymore, and nevertheless, this works quite well because normally I do not have to encourage the colleagues of mine to do this, but rather support them in sharing something with the public. And also, if you look at this in today's world, it's also kind of personal brand building, right? So if you can demonstrate the cool stuff that you did, it's not only good for Zalando, it definitely is, but it's also good for yourself. And to strengthen your own personal brand. And in general, we also have a culture of sharing a lot. Also internally, we have a lot of guilds. And coming back to the beginning, as we're such a tech-driven company, we all know how the pace of innovation is in that area. And so it's in the best interest of everyone if we can grow and develop further quickly. And this is also represented in showing what we did. And this is why I think it works quite well, and it's really kind of quite natural that we do this internally as well as externally.
Awesome. And for everybody who wants to look into that, you can check out in the web opensource.zalando.com, for example. There's a lot of stuff to find, and also check out the tech blog. There's a lot of very interesting content. Unfortunately, we are now getting to the end of the episode and running out of time. There is a lot of stuff that I would still like to discuss, and probably we should do in a couple of months another episode where we talk about roadmap and team management and so on. It's just, impressive numbers, 200 teams, so many developers. A lot of stuff going on at Zalando. I think everybody is excited about hearing more. Jan, thanks a lot for being with us on this podcast. It was hard to find the time for all of us together, so really appreciate it. I think it is a great episode. We have about 40 minutes. I think that's a good episode for everybody who's commuting to work or something to listen in. And looking forward to some comments and questions that might come up from the audience later on. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Kelly. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Take care.
Take care.